Welcome to another episode of the Part 145 EASA training from Phoenix Way Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, and I'm Sam.
Well, in this episode, we will continue the topic of 145.A.200 management system. So for today's mission, imagine this scenario for a second. An airline outsources an engine overhaul, right?
Right.
And during that process, a microscopic but, super critical crack in a turbine blade goes completely unreported. Why? Because three different subcontractors all just assumed that someone else down the line had already checked it.
Yeah, that is a terrifying thought. And it's exactly what we're trying to prevent today.
Exactly. Today, we are unpacking 4 critical pillars of the management system to keep your complex network safe. We're looking at managing risks across different organizations, safely navigating sudden organizational changes, communicating safety effectively, and properly documenting all of it.
It's a massive topic, but so relevant. I mean, very few organizations do absolutely everything in-house anymore. Let's dive right into the source text. Specifically, we're looking at Clause GM1, 145.A.200, paragraph A, subparagraph 3.
And that one covers safety risk management for interfaces between organizations, right?
Well, right away, paragraph A says we have to address complex operational and maintenance arrangements. We're talking about situations with multiple contractors or, sprawling webs of subcontractors.
Okay, let's unpack this because that sounds like a logistical minefield. I mean, how do you even begin to assess the risk when you have dozens of different companies touching the exact same aircraft?
Well, you have to map the territory first. Paragraph B lays out a clear requirement. Hazard identification and risk assessment must identify all the parties involved, and you have to evaluate the overall control structure.
So you have to assess how everyone connects. What exactly are we evaluating there?
The text gives us 5 specific elements to look at. First, paragraph B.1, the coordination and interfaces between the parties. Point 2, the applicable procedures they're using. Point 3, the communication and reporting channels.
Which is crucial so things don't get lost in translation.
Exactly. Then point 4 is task allocation and responsibilities. And finally, point 5, the qualifications of key personnel, specifically as per point 145.A.30.
Wait, let me look at that 4th point, task allocation. If we're mapping out responsibilities across, say, 5 companies, things get messy fast. But the next section has some pretty strict boundaries, doesn't it?
It really does. Paragraph C ensures 4 very specific outcomes. Point 1 requires clear accountability and responsibility. But point 2 is the big one. It dictates that only a single party is responsible for a specific task. Absolutely no overlapping responsibilities.
I have to push back a little here. Is it really realistic to have 0 overlapping responsibilities in a massive aviation network? I mean, think about building a house. If the electrician and the plumber have overlapping duties and they don't communicate, the house catches fire. But in aviation, doesn't it feel safer to have 2 pairs of eyes on one problem?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know.
Yeah.
But EASA insists on 0 overlap to kill what psychologists call the bystander effect.
Oh, right, where everyone assumes someone else is handling the emergency.
Exactly. In aviation, overlap creates deadly coordination errors. Let's look at a real-life example. Say an airline outsources an engine overhaul to a subcontractor, and that subcontractor brings in an independent expert just to do parts testing.
Okay, so a contractor hiring a subcontractor.
Right. If their responsibilities overlap on the paperwork, the primary subcontractor might think, well, the independent expert verified it, while the expert thinks, oh, the primary subcontractor already signed that off. The check simply doesn't happen.
Wow, so by forcing a single party to be responsible for a single task, you completely eliminate that ambiguity.
Spot on. And that ties right into point 3, which demands clear reporting lines, and point 4, which ensures staff have the ability to directly report high-risk hazards.
Directly, like without going through 10 layers of middle management.
Exactly. If that independent expert spots a severe hazard, they need a clear reporting line straight to the top. And rounding out this first pillar, we have paragraphed, which states that your management system must ensure regular communication between all parties to discuss work progress, risk mitigation, and any changes.
That makes total sense. So you can have the most perfectly defined interfaces, clear boundaries, and direct reporting lines. But what happens when something within that network suddenly changes?
That brings us to our second pillar. Because unmanaged change is, well, it's the ultimate stress test. Let's look at Clause GM2 145.A.200, paragraph A, subparagraph 3, titled Management of Change.
And what's the core warning there?
Paragraph A warns that changes like in structure, personnel, or procedures may introduce new latent hazards if they aren't managed. So paragraph B requires you to proactively assess the safety implications of any change. You have to engage affected personnel and evaluate the magnitude and criticality of the change.
Wait, does this mean, like, if we change the brand of coffee in the break room, we need a massive formal hazard assessment?
Well, no. That's why paragraph B focuses on magnitude and criticality. A coffee change is super low magnitude. But paragraph C does say we need a structured process to manage changes and minimize risks.
So how do we know when a change is critical enough to trigger that formal process?
Paragraph actually gives us 9 very specific triggers where hazard identification must be initiated. I'll walk you through them. Number 1 is changes to the organizational structure. Number 2, new aircraft types. Number 3, the addition of aircraft of the same or similar type.
I mean, that third one is interesting, adding a similar aircraft.
It is, but let's power through the rest first. Number 4 is significant personnel changes. Number 5, new or amended regulations. Number 6, security changes.
Which makes sense with, ramp access and all that.
Right. Number 7 is economic pressures. Number 8 is new schedules, locations, or equipment. And finally, number 9, new subcontractors.
Okay, let's go back to trigger number 3, adding a similar aircraft type. Most people might think, oh, it's basically the exact same plane we've worked on for years, so no big deal, right?
And that assumption is exactly what causes accidents. This is where the source text brings in human factors, or HF. Paragraph E states that changes can introduce human factors issues, and paragraph F says we must minimize these risks by assessing the impact on personnel.
So we're looking at the humans in the system, not just the hardware.
Exactly. And paragraph G highlights the most dangerous phase, the transition period.
The transition period, you mean like the messy middle ground of getting from the old way to the new way?
Precisely. Let's apply a real-life example. Imagine your organization is adding an Airbus A320neo to a fleet of older A320ceos. Physically, they look incredibly similar. It falls perfectly under trigger 3.
Right, a similar aircraft type.
But from a human factors perspective, during that transition period, the risk peaks. Think about a highly experienced mechanic. They have all this muscle memory from the old model, now they're working on the new one, and a specific fastener requires a slightly different torque specification.
Oh, wow. Under time pressure, their brain just defaults to muscle memory.
Exactly. That deeply ingrained habit becomes a latent hazard.
So the very experience that makes them great suddenly makes them a liability. How does an organization actually support their team through that?
Paragraph outlines the support mechanisms.
Yeah.
Point 1, formal hazard and risk assessments for major changes. Point 2, identifying impacts on resources, both material and human, as well as management direction and control. Point 3, safety-focused risk assessments. And point 4, involving key stakeholders.
That's a lot of proactive work.
It is, and paragraph 8 requires you to also review previous risk assessments to see how the new change affects existing hazards. You have to look backward to see what old risks you might have just woken up.
Okay, so we've established that human error peaks during these transitions. But to manage all these changes and risks, you need to actually talk to your team about them. Which brings us to communication, right?
Yes. Our third pillar. Let's look at AMC 145.A.200 note, paragraph A, subparagraph 4, communication on safety.
What are the main rules there?
Paragraph A outlines 4 requirements. Point 1, inform personnel of safety activities relevant to their responsibilities. Point 2, share critical risk and hazard information. Point 3, explain why actions are taken. And point 4, explain why new safety procedures are introduced. And paragraph B says we should use regular meetings to discuss this.
So what does this all mean for the floor staff? I want to push back on points 3 and 4, the requirement to explain why. Why can't management just say, here is the new rule, follow it?
Because blind compliance is fragile. If you just issue an order, you aren't building a safety culture. GM 145.A.200, paragraph A, subparagraph 4, titled Safety Promotion, explains this. Paragraph A says safety training and information sharing support promotion.
And what does that promotion actually achieve?
Paragraph B says it supports 3 things. Point 1, a positive safety culture. Point 2, organizational learning. And point 3, an effective reporting scheme and a just culture. Paragraph C notes this complements risk mitigation, and paragraph ties training back to point 145.A.30.
A just culture is so vital. It means staff feel safe reporting their own mistakes, right? Assuming no gross negligence. But how does explaining the why actually build that?
Well, let's use a real-life example. Management introduces a strict new tool checkout procedure. If they just say, follow this new form, mechanics view it as bureaucratic red tape.
Right, they'll just find a workaround the minute they're rushed.
Exactly. But if you use your regular morning shift meetings to explain the why, management says, hey, we're doing this because Last month, a wrench was almost left inside an engine cowl.
Oh, that changes the whole context.
Completely. Explaining the why turns blind compliance into active safety promotion. They aren't ticking a box anymore. They're preventing an engine explosion.
But all of this communication, risk assessing, and change management kind of evaporates if there isn't a single source of truth to anchor it. Which brings us to the final pillar.
Documentation. Let's pull up Clause GM1, 145.A.200, paragraph A, subparagraph 5, Management System Documentation.
Okay, hit me with it.
Paragraph A states, you must document your safety policy, objectives, and processes in a manual, like a safety management manual, or the MOE, the Maintenance Organization Exposition. It notes a separate manual is preferred if you hold multiple certificates, just to avoid duplication.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this sounds like a massive bureaucratic headache. Are we just creating giant binders that gather dust on a shelf?
That's the trap a lot of places fall into. But paragraph B offers a brilliant solution. It says you can reference separate external documents, like specific policies or procedures within your manual, or MOE. And those references are then considered an integral part of the management system.
So it acts more like a master index. How does that work in practice?
Let's take technician fatigue, a huge risk factor. Say your HR department has a standalone, highly detailed policy on fatigue management. Instead of copy-pasting that entire thing into the MOE,
Which would make the MOE instantly outdated the second HR updates their policy.
exactly. Instead, the MOE simply references the separate HR document. It seamlessly integrates it into the safety framework without creating redundant paperwork. The MOE isn't just a dusty binder, it's the organization's DNA.
That is such a smarter way to handle it. Documentation is really the master blueprint that aligns the interfaces, the change processes, and the communications we've covered today.
It holds the whole system together.
Well, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. As our aviation networks grow increasingly interconnected, are the complex systems we build to manage safety at risk of becoming a hazard themselves if we lose sight of the human element at the center of it all? In the next episode, we will continue 145.A.200 management system.
Once again, our episodes are up, but remember, you can find many more trending topics on our YouTube channel, Phoenix Way Academy. Hope to see you there soon, but for now, take care and good.